Evan Holt woke to find a ghost standing in his kitchen. She was 12 years old, barefoot, and bleeding through a calico dress he'd bought for a dead woman. When she whispered his name, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in 7 years, he knew the past had finally found him. And it had brought 3 killers with it. The girl needed protection. He needed answers. But dawn was coming, and with it, men who would burn his world to ash to claim what they believed was theirs. If you're ready to discover how far a man will go to protect the daughter he never knew existed, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across this country of ours. The wind came cold across the Wyoming basin that April morning, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Evan Holt stood at the window of his ranch house, coffee cup warming his calloused hands, watching the eastern horizon bleed from black to gray. He'd been awake for an hour already, old habit from years when sleep meant vulnerability, when dawn might bring discovery or death. Those days were supposed to be behind him. He was 42 now, weathered lean by sun and solitude, his dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. The ranch wasn't much, 300 acres of stubborn grass, a handful of cattle, a barn that needed patching before winter. But it was his. Bought with money earned honest, built with his own hands, far enough from any town that neighbors were a day's ride and strangers were rare. That was how he preferred it. A man with a past learned to appreciate distance. The coffee had gone lukewarm when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to morning, not the lowing of cattle or the creak of settling wood, something else, something human. Evan set down the cup and moved to the gun cabinet, his movements economical and deliberate. He pulled the Winchester from its rack, checked the chamber, always loaded, always ready, and crossed to the back door. The hinges needed oil. He made a mental note, even as his pulse began its familiar quickening, the old alertness flooding through him like cold water. Outside, the world was pearl gray and silent. He moved along the side of the house, boots barely whispering against the dirt. The chicken coop sat undisturbed. The horses in the corral stood quiet, ears forward but not alarmed. Whatever had made the sound, the animals didn't consider it a threat. That meant human, and close. Evan rounded the corner toward the front porch, and stopped. She sat on the bottom step, small and utterly still, like something carved from exhaustion itself. A child. A girl. 12, maybe 13, though it was hard to tell beneath the dirt and the bone-deep weariness that seemed to hollow her out. Her feet were bare and torn. Her dress, a faded calico, once blue, now gray with dust and wear, hung loose on her thin frame. Dark hair fell in tangled waves around a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so gaunt, so haunted. She didn't look up when he approached, just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. "You lost?" Evan's voice came out rougher than he intended. He lowered the rifle, not pointing it at her, but not setting it aside either. The girl's eyes lifted slowly. They were gray, storm cloud gray, and ancient in a way that made his chest tighten. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was real. "Water," she said finally. Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "Please." Evan hesitated. Every instinct he'd honed over years of careful isolation screamed at him to send her away, to not get involved, to protect the quiet life he'd built here. Children meant families, families meant questions, questions meant exposure. But those eyes, those goddamn eyes. He lowered the rifle completely. "Come on." Inside, he poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup and watched as she drank. Not desperate gulps, but slow, measured sips, the discipline of someone who'd learned to make scarcity last. When she finished, she set the cup down carefully and looked up at him. "Thank you. Where'd you come from?" Evan pulled out a chair and sat across from her, the kitchen table between them. "Where's your family?" Something flickered across her face, pain, deep and fresh. "Gone." "Gone where?" "Dead." She said it flat, matter of fact, the way a child might report the weather, but her hands trembled where they rested on the table. Evan felt the familiar weight settle on him, the burden of other people's tragedy, the responsibility he'd spent 7 years trying to escape. How long you been walking? 3 days, maybe 4. She looked down at her hands. I lost count. From where? North. The mining camp near Stillwater. Stillwater was 40 miles. 40 miles through rough country, creek beds, and canyon land with night temperatures that could kill. She'd walked it alone, barefoot, without supplies. Why? Evan heard himself ask. Why'd you come here? The girl reached into the pocket of her dress, a pocket nearly torn away at the seam, and pulled out something folded. Paper, yellowed and worn soft at the creases. She set it on the table between them. My mother told me to find you. Before she died, she gave me this. She said you'd know what to do. Evan stared at the paper. He didn't want to touch it, didn't want to unfold it and see what truth it contained, because some part of him already knew. Some part of him had known the moment he'd seen those gray eyes. His hand moved anyway, reaching across the table, unfolding the paper with fingers that had begun to shake. The handwriting hit him first. Delicate loops and careful letters, exactly as he remembered. He'd watched that hand write before. Lists and letters, notes tucked into his saddlebag when he rode out, small declarations of affection she'd been too shy to speak aloud. Evan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but the risk was too great. They were always watching, always waiting. I thought if I disappeared, if I let you believe I was dead, they might give up. They might let you live in peace. I was wrong. The girl's name is Lila. She's 12 years old. She's yours. I know this is unfair. I know you have every right to hate me for this, for all of it. But she has no one else now. The men who hunted me will come for her if they learn she exists. They believe I took something from them. They'll never stop. The dress she's wearing, I kept it all these years. You bought it for me in Cheyenne, remember? You said the blue matched my eyes. I couldn't bear to part with it. It's all I had left of you. Please, Evan, protect her. She's innocent. She's good. She doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes. I loved you. I never stopped. See. The letter fell from Evan's hands. He stared at it lying there on the scarred wood of his table, the words blurring as his vision wavered. His throat had closed. His chest felt crushed, as if someone had laid a boulder across his ribs. Catherine. Her name was a wound that had never fully healed, just scabbed over and scarred into something he'd learned to live with. 7 years ago, she'd been everything. The reason he'd finally tried to build something good, something clean. He'd met her in Cheyenne, where she worked in a boarding house, quiet and kind and impossibly beautiful. They'd talked about marriage, about a ranch somewhere remote where his past couldn't find them. Then she'd vanished. No note, no warning. Just gone one morning, and the landlady said she'd left in the night, taken nothing but the clothes on her back. He'd searched for weeks, riding himself and his horse nearly to death, asking questions in every town and camp within 100 miles. Finally, a traveling preacher had told him the news. Catherine had been killed, caught in a fire that swept through a squatter camp near the Montana border, burned beyond recognition, buried in an unmarked grave. Evan had wanted to die, had come close a few times in the months that followed, but dying required courage he couldn't muster, so he'd done the next best thing, disappeared into this isolated stretch of Wyoming basin and built a life as empty and quiet as a tomb. And now this truth, delivered by a ghost. He looked at the girl, Lila, his daughter. She was watching him with those gray eyes, Catherine's eyes, her expression careful and neutral, as if she'd learned not to expect kindness or comfort from the world. How did she die? His voice came out raw. Lila's composure cracked just slightly. Fire. The cabin we were staying in. She got me out, but she went back for something. A box. She said it had important papers. The roof came down before she could get back out. Where were you living? Lots of places. We moved every few months. She said it was safer that way. Lila's hands twisted together in her lap. We were never anywhere long enough for me to go to school or make friends. She taught me herself, reading, writing, numbers, and other things. What things? How to disappear. How to tell if someone's following you. How to lie so people believe you. She said it simply, reciting lessons the way another child might list multiplication tables. She said someday I might need those skills, that if anything happened to her, I should come find you. She made me memorize your name and the location of this ranch. Made me practice the route in my head until I could see it like a map. Evan's jaw clenched. Catherine had trained their daughter for survival the way a soldier trained for war, because she'd known. She'd always known they'd come. These men she mentioned in the letter, he said carefully. Who are they? Lila shook her head. She never told me their names, just said they were dangerous, that they believed she stole something valuable from them years ago, before I was born. She said it wasn't true, but they'd never believe her. And you think they're still looking? I know they are. Lila's voice dropped to barely a whisper. 3 of them came to the camp the day before the fire. They were asking questions about a woman matching Mama's description. She heard about it from a neighbor and we left that same night. She said we'd head south, find someplace even more remote. Evan felt cold spread through his gut. You think they started the fire? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe Mama was just careless because she was scared and exhausted. Lila's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back with fierce determination. It doesn't matter now. She's gone. And she said you'd keep me safe. The weight of it settled on Evan's shoulders. Not just the responsibility, but the terrible irony. Catherine had spent 7 years running, 7 years keeping their daughter hidden and safe. And in the end, she'd sent the girl back to him. Back to the one man whose past was dangerous enough that she'd fled from it in the first place. Because whatever those men believed Catherine had stolen, Evan knew the truth. He'd been there when it happened, 13 years ago, in a mining camp in Nevada. He'd watched Catherine's brother, a man named Jack Brennan, stumble into the boarding house where she worked, wounded and terrified, carrying a leather satchel he refused to let out of his sight. Jack had been a prospector, a decent man who'd gotten mixed up with the wrong partners. He'd discovered they were claim jumping, murdering legitimate miners and stealing their stakes. When he'd threatened to report them to the marshal, they'd turned on him. He'd managed to escape with evidence, assay reports, forged deeds, a ledger detailing their crimes. He'd died 3 days later from his wounds, but not before making Evan promise to protect Catherine. The partners would assume she had the evidence, Jack had said. They'd come for her. They'd never stop. Evan had tried to protect her, had planned to take her far away, somewhere those men would never find them. But Catherine had vanished before he could. She must have found the evidence Jack had hidden. Must have realized that staying with Evan would only put him in danger. So she'd run. And she'd been running ever since. And now those men, or men like them, were still hunting. Still believing Catherine had something that belonged to them. Evan stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He crossed to the window and stared out at the empty basin. The sun had risen fully now, painting the sage gold and the distant mountains purple. Do they know about me? He asked without turning around. These men. Did your mother ever mention my name around anyone who might have heard? No, she was careful about that. She called you E in her journal, nothing more. And she burned the journal before we left the last camp. Small mercies. If they didn't know his name or location, then Lila's arrival here might have gone unnoticed. Might have. The people at the mining camp, Evan said slowly. Did anyone see you leave? See which direction you headed? Lila was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was very small. There was a man at the trading post where I took water the first day. He asked where I was going. I told him south to stay with an aunt in Laramie. Did he believe you? I don't know. He seemed... She hesitated. Interested. He asked a lot of questions about my mother. Whether she had family. Whether she'd left anything behind. Evan's hands curled into fists against the windowsill. What did you tell him? Nothing. I said my mother died alone and I was an orphan. And then you walked out of that trading post heading south. Yes, but I waited until dark and doubled back north, then cut east toward here. Just like Mama taught me. There was a note of pride in her voice, quickly suppressed. It might be enough. Might buy them time. But Evan had survived this long by never assuming he had time, by always preparing for the worst. He turned back to face Lila. She was still sitting at the table, small and exhausted and trying so hard to be brave. His daughter. The reality of it kept hitting him in waves, each one threatening to pull him under. You hungry? He asked. She nodded, cautious hope flickering across her face. "I'll make breakfast. Then you'll sleep. We'll figure out the rest after." While Lila ate, slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food might be taken away, Evan moved through the house, his mind working through possibilities and plans. The ranch was defensible to a point. Good sight lines in all directions, fresh water from the creek, and enough supplies to last a few weeks if needed. But it was also isolated. If trouble came, there'd be no help. No law. Just him and whatever he could do. And he'd do anything. The certainty of it surprised him with its intensity. This child, this stranger who carried Catherine's eyes and a piece of his own blood, had become his responsibility in the space of a single letter. He would protect her, whatever it cost. After breakfast, he showed Lila to the small bedroom that had been sitting empty since he'd built the house. There was a bed with a quilt Catherine had made before she'd disappeared. Blue calico, the same fabric as the dress Lila wore now. Evan had kept it all these years, unable to part with it, one of the few pieces of her he had left. Lila touched the quilt with gentle fingers. "It matches my dress." "Your mother made it. She was good with her hands, good at making things beautiful." Evan's throat tightened. "Get some rest. I'll be outside if you need anything." He started to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why did you leave her?" The question hit like a fist. Evan turned slowly. "What?" "Mama never talked about you, but sometimes when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her crying. She'd say your name." Lila's expression was unreadable. "I always wondered why you left. Why you weren't there to protect us." The word should have made him angry, should have sparked defensiveness or justification. Instead, they just carved the wound deeper. "I didn't leave her," Evan said quietly. "She left me, to protect me, because she thought the men hunting her would kill me if they found us together." He paused. She was probably right. Lila studied him for a long moment. "She still loved you, even at the end." "I know." Evan's voice cracked slightly. "I never stopped loving her either." He left before the girl could see his face break completely. Outside, he stood in the yard, breathing hard, fists clenched at his sides. The morning sun was warm on his shoulders, but he felt cold through to his bones. Catherine was gone. Really, finally gone this time. No false hope, no possibility of miracles. But she'd left him something, someone. Lila. Evan looked back at the house. Through the window, he could see the girl curled on the bed, already asleep, exhausted beyond endurance. She looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile, and impossibly his. He would protect her, he would keep her safe. And if those men came, the ones who'd hunted Catherine for 13 years, who'd maybe killed her, who thought they could claim what didn't belong to them, they would learn what it cost to threaten Evan Holt's family. Because he'd lost Catherine once. He'd lived with that grief carved into his chest for 7 years. He would not lose his daughter, too. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of rain closer. Storm coming, likely by evening. Evan walked to the barn to check the horses and secure the doors. As he worked, his mind cataloged everything that needed doing, strengthen the window shutters, clean and load the spare rifles, inventory ammunition, check the escape routes he'd mapped years ago when he first arrived here. Preparation. Vigilance. Violence, if necessary. The old skills never quite forgotten. He was mucking out the stalls when he heard the horses spook, both of them, simultaneously, heads up and ears swiveling toward the eastern trail. The trail that led from the main road. The trail no one used because no one had business out here. Evan set down the pitchfork and moved to the barn door, staying in shadow. His hand found the revolver at his hip, thumb resting on the hammer. 3 riders appeared on the horizon. They came at an easy pace, unhurried, spread out in a line that was just casual enough to seem non-threatening but positioned perfectly to cover all approaches. The morning sun was behind them, making them hard to see clearly, but Evan didn't need details. He recognized the formation, recognized the posture. Men who knew how to hunt. His pulse didn't quicken. That would come later, if it came at all. Right now, there was only the cold clarity of assessment. 3 against 1. Unknown weapons and skill level. Lila asleep in the house, vulnerable, unacceptable odds, but odds he'd faced before. The riders drew closer. Evan could make out details now. Dusty range clothes, broad-brimmed hats, gun belts worn with the ease of long familiarity. The one in the middle sat his horse with the confidence of a leader. Older than the others, maybe 50, with a gray beard and eyes that scanned the ranch with professional thoroughness. They stopped 30 yards from the barn, close enough to talk, far enough to avoid an ambush. The gray-bearded man touched his hat brim. "Morning." Evan stepped out of the barn, hands loose at his sides, body language deliberately neutral. "Morning. You're a long way from anywhere." "Could say the same about you." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This your place?" "It is." "Nice spread. Quiet." "That's the idea." The man nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. His gaze drifted toward the house, lingered on the window of the bedroom where Lila slept. "We're looking for someone," he said. "A girl, young, maybe 12, 13, dark hair, traveling alone." His eyes came back to Evan. "You seen anyone like that?" Every muscle in Evan's body wanted to tense, to prepare, to reach for the gun. He kept himself loose instead, kept his expression mildly curious. "Can't say I have." "What's she to you?" "Family." The word came easy, practiced. "Her mother died recently. Fire. Tragic thing. We're trying to find the girl, make sure she's cared for properly." Lies. Clean and smooth as river stones. "That's kind of you," Evan said. "But I haven't seen any children, haven't seen anyone at all. Like you said, it's quiet out here." The gray-bearded man studied him for a long moment. His companions shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons with studied casualness. "Mind if we look around?" the man asked, "just to be sure." "I do mind, actually." Evan's voice stayed level. "This is private property. You've asked your question and gotten your answer. Time to move along." The temperature dropped. The pretense of civility evaporated like morning dew. "That's not very neighborly," the gray-bearded man said softly. "I'm not your neighbor, and you're trespassing. We just want the girl." "Don't know what you're talking about." "Her mother stole from us. The debt passes to the child. Even if I knew what you were talking about, which I don't, a child can't inherit debt. That's not how law works." "Out here?" The man gestured at the empty basin around them. "We're a long way from law, friend." Evan's hand moved, not to his gun, not yet, but shifting his weight, changing his stance into something balanced and ready. "Then I guess we're down to simpler terms. You need to leave now." The gray-bearded man's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." For a long moment no one moved. The wind picked up, rattling through the sage. One of the horses stamped nervously. Then the gray-bearded man smiled, cold and thin. "We'll be back, and next time we won't ask." He turned his horse, and the three of them rode out, heading back the way they'd come. But Evan knew it wasn't over, knew they'd be watching, waiting, planning. He stayed in the yard until they were out of sight, then turned and ran for the house. Lila was awake, standing at the window, her face pale. "I heard voices." "We need to leave. Now." Evan was already moving, pulling supplies from cabinets, stuffing them into saddlebags. "Can you ride?" "Mama taught me." "Good. Get anything you want to keep from that room. We have 5 minutes." She didn't argue, didn't ask questions, just moved with the same swift efficiency that Catherine must have taught her, gathering the few possessions she had. Evan worked with practiced speed, his mind racing through options. They couldn't stay here. The ranch was too exposed, too indefensible against 3 armed men who knew it was occupied. They needed distance, needed terrain that favored defense over offense. The canyon. 20 miles south, a network of box canyons and hidden alcoves he'd scouted years ago, back when he'd first arrived and was still planning escape routes. Water, shelter, multiple exits, defensible positions. If they could reach it before the riders circled back, it would have to be enough. He saddled both horses, loaded them with supplies and weapons. Lila appeared with the blue quilt clutched in her arms. "Leave it," Evan said. "No." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "It's all I have left of her." He looked at her, this child who'd already lost everything, who was being forced to run again, who deserved so much better than the life violence had carved out for her. "Tie it to the saddle," he said. They rode out heading west, away from the direction the men had gone. But a mile from the house, Evan turned south, picking up an old game trail that wound through broken country where tracks were hard to follow. Behind them, smoke began to rise against the morning sky. Evan didn't have to look to know what it meant. The riders had circled back. They'd found the house empty, and they'd burned it to the ground. Everything he'd built. 7 years of careful isolation, of quiet peace, of trying to outrun his past. Gone. He looked at Lila, riding beside him with her chin up and her eyes dry, refusing to show fear even though he could see it in the rigid line of her shoulders. His daughter. Not gone. Never gone. Because Catherine had given him something infinitely more valuable than a house or a ranch or a quiet life. She'd given him a reason to fight. The storm clouds gathered overhead as they rode deeper into the basin. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and clean, washing away their tracks even as it soaked them through. Evan didn't slow down, didn't look back. Only forward now. Toward the canyon, toward whatever came next. Toward survival. The rain came harder as they pushed deeper into the basin, turning the trail to mud beneath the horses' hooves. Evan kept them moving at a steady pace, fast enough to put distance between them and the burning ranch, careful enough not to exhaust the animals. Lila rode without complaint, her small form hunched against the cold rain, the blue quilt wrapped around her shoulders now, instead of tied to the saddle. She hadn't spoken since they'd seen the smoke. Evan understood. There were no words for watching your whole world burn twice in 1 week. He kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for movement, for any sign they were being followed. The rain would help hide their trail, but it also obscured visibility. A double-edged blade. By midday, they'd covered 8 miles. The landscape had shifted from open grassland to broken country. Scattered rock formations, deep washes carved by ancient floods, juniper trees twisted by wind into grotesque shapes. Good country for disappearing. For bad country for running if they were cornered. Evan called a halt in a shallow depression ringed by boulders. Not much shelter, but enough to give the horses a brief rest and check their supplies. Lila slid from her saddle and stood swaying slightly, exhaustion written in every line of her body. She'd walked 40 miles to reach the ranch, slept maybe 3 hours, and now they were running again. The child was running on pure will. Sit, Evan said, gentler than he'd intended. Drink some water. She obeyed mechanically, sinking down against a boulder. Her hands shook as she raised the canteen to her lips. Evan checked the horse's legs and hooves, his mind cataloging their remaining resources. 2 horses, both sound. Enough food for maybe 5 days if they rationed carefully. Ammunition, 2 boxes for the Winchester, another box for the revolver. Blankets, matches, a small pot for cooking. The bare essentials for survival, nothing more. He'd built that ranch from nothing. Had furniture he'd carved himself, books he'd collected over years, tools that had become extensions of his own hands. All of it ash now. The rage came sudden and fierce, flooding through him like wildfire. He wanted to turn around, ride back, face those 3 men and make them pay for every goddamn thing they'd taken. From Catherine, from Lila, from him. But that was grief talking, not sense, and grief got you killed. Are we gonna die? Lila's voice was small and matter-of-fact, the question of a child who'd already learned that death was always a possibility. Evan turned to face her. She was watching him with those gray eyes, Catherine's eyes, waiting for an answer. Not reassurance, just truth. Not today, he said, and not tomorrow. Those men want something they think your mother had. We're going to make sure they never get it. What if she didn't have it? What if they're wrong? Doesn't matter what they believe. Matters what we do about it. Evan crouched down in front of her, meeting her eyes at her level. Listen to me. Your mother kept you safe for 12 years, taught you how to survive. That wasn't for nothing. You understand? Lila nodded slowly. We're going to a place I know, deep canyon country, lots of hiding spots, good water, hard to track through. We hole up there for a few days, let things cool down. Then we figure out our next move. And if they follow us, then I deal with them. Evan's voice went flat and cold. One way or another. Something shifted in Lila's expression. Not fear exactly, but recognition. as if she'd heard that tone before, in her mother's voice perhaps, when Catherine talked about doing whatever was necessary to protect her daughter. "Mama said you were dangerous," Lila said quietly. "That's why she left. She said if the men found you with her, they'd kill you. But I think she was wrong. I think she was protecting them from you, not you from them." The observation was too sharp, too knowing. Evan stood abruptly and turned away, busying himself with checking the rifle. "Your mother was a lot of things, but she wasn't wrong about keeping me out of it. I've done things." He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. Mount up. We need to keep moving." They rode through the afternoon, the rain tapering to a cold drizzle that soaked through their clothes and turned the air to ice. Evan pushed them hard, knowing the weather was both blessing and curse. It would hide their tracks, yes, but it would also slow them down, sap their strength, make every mile harder than the last. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the storm clouds purple and gold, they reached the canyon. It opened before them like a wound in the earth, a deep slash of red rock and shadow, cottonwood trees lining a thin ribbon of water that gleamed silver in the fading light. The walls rose sheer on both sides, maybe 200 feet of striated stone, narrowing at the entrance to a passage barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. Perfect. Evan dismounted and led his horse through the entrance on foot, Lila following close behind. Inside, the canyon opened up into a wider space, almost peaceful. The sound of water echoed off the stone. Birds called from hidden nests in the cliff face. The air smelled of wet sage and ancient rock. A quarter-mile in, the canyon forked. Evan took the left branch, which narrowed again and twisted back on itself, climbing gradually. Another 100 yards, and they reached what he'd been looking for, a shallow alcove carved into the north wall, protected by an overhang of stone. Hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. He'd found this place 3 years ago, marked it in his memory as a bolt hole. Never thought he'd actually need it. "We camp here tonight," Evan said, already unsaddling his horse. "No fire. We eat cold and sleep in shifts." Lila slid down from her saddle and stood looking around the alcove. It was maybe 15 feet deep and 10 wide, the floor relatively level. Dry, at least, and sheltered from the wind. Better than nothing. "I can take first watch," she offered. "No, you sleep. I'll wake you if I need to." "But you're tired, too." "Lila." Evan's voice came out sharper than he intended. He softened it with effort. "I've gone longer without sleep than you've been alive. I'll be fine. You need to rest." She looked like she might argue, then simply nodded and pulled the damp quilt around her shoulders. Within minutes, she was asleep, curled against the stone wall like a small animal gone to ground. Evan sat at the mouth of the alcove, rifle across his knees, and watched the darkness gather in the canyon below. The rain had stopped, leaving everything dripping and cold. Stars began to emerge between the breaking clouds, bright and indifferent. His mind wouldn't settle. Kept circling back to Catherine, to the letter, to the impossible weight of everything he hadn't known. A daughter. For 12 years he'd had a daughter, and Catherine had carried that secret alone, had raised the child alone, had taught her to survive in a world that wanted to destroy them both. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it, anger burned. At Catherine for not trusting him, for thinking he couldn't protect them both, at himself for not searching harder when she disappeared, for accepting the story of her death too easily, at the men who'd hunted her for 13 years over something as meaningless as money or pride or whatever the hell they thought she'd stolen. And fear. Raw, unfamiliar fear. Not for himself, he'd made peace with his own mortality years ago, but for Lila, for this child who'd already lost so much, who was depending on him to keep her alive. He didn't know how to be a father, didn't know how to comfort or guide or do any of the gentle things children needed. He knew how to survive, how to fight, how to kill when necessary. Maybe that would have to be enough. The night deepened. Evan's eyes adjusted to the darkness, picking out shapes and movements, an owl gliding silent through the canyon, bats flickering against the stars, the slow shift of shadows as the moon rose. Normal sounds, normal sights. He was dozing, still upright but drifting, when the horses stirred. Evan came fully awake in an instant, every sense sharp and focused. Both animals stood with their heads up, ears pricked forward, staring back down the canyon the way they'd come. Someone was out there. He rose silently and moved to Lila, clamped a hand gently over her mouth. She woke without a sound, eyes wide in the darkness. "Quiet," he breathed. "Someone's coming. Stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." She nodded against his palm. He released her and picked up the rifle, checking the chamber by feel. 5 rounds. He had the revolver too. 6 more. 11 bullets against however many men were out there in the dark. Evan slipped out of the alcove and down the narrow trail, moving by memory and instinct. The canyon walls channeled sound strangely, sometimes amplifying it, sometimes muffling it completely. He strained to hear over the rush of water, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. There. Voices. Low and cautious, trying to stay quiet, but not quite quiet enough. "Tracks end here. Rain washed out most of it, but the horse shit's fresh. They're in this canyon somewhere. Could be miles in by now. This place is a maze." "Don't matter. Only one way in, one way out. We camp at the entrance, wait for morning. They have to come out eventually." The gray-bearded man's voice, unmistakable. "We're not waiting. Every hour gives them time to dig in, set up defenses. We go in now, slow and careful. In the dark. That's suicide if they're expecting us. They're expecting us either way. At least in the dark we have cover. And I'm tired of chasing this goddamn ghost story. Woman's dead, fine. But the girl knows something. Kids always know more than they let on. We get the girl, we get answers." Silence. Then the sound of men dismounting, horses being tied off, equipment being checked and readied. 3 men, all armed, all trained, all willing to kill a child for information she might not even have. Evan felt something cold and final settle in his chest. The last remnants of the quiet rancher he'd tried to become evaporated like mist. What remained was older, harder. The part of him that had survived brutal years by being more brutal than the men who'd tried to kill him. He moved back up the trail toward the alcove, his mind already calculating angles and distances, cover and kill zones. The canyon walls made traditional flanking impossible. Anyone coming in would have to funnel through narrow passages, single file or 2 abreast at most. The darkness and his knowledge of the terrain were advantages. Their numbers and firepower were theirs, near enough to even odds. Lila was exactly where he'd left her, pressed against the stone wall, her face pale in the moonlight. "How many?" she whispered. 3. The same ones from this morning. Evan knelt and opened his saddlebag, pulling out the box of revolver ammunition. He began reloading the chambers he'd fired earlier for practice, his hands steady. "They're coming in, tonight. What do we do?" "You stay here. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you don't move. You don't make a sound. If I don't come back by dawn..." He pulled a folded map from his pocket and pressed it into her hands. "Follow this route. It'll take you to a town called Redemption, about 30 miles southeast. There's a woman there, runs a boarding house. Her name's Margaret Crane. You tell her Evan Holt sent you, she'll help." "I'm not leaving you. You'll do what I tell you." Evan's voice went hard. "I can't fight and worry about you at the same time. You want to help? Stay alive. Stay hidden. Let me do what I need to do." Lila's jaw clenched, but she nodded. "Will you come back?" "Yes." He said it with absolute certainty, even though he had no right to make that promise. "I always finish what I start." He took the Winchester and the revolver and moved back down into the canyon, leaving Lila alone in the dark with nothing but hope and a mother's old quilt. The moon had risen high enough now to cast silver light into the canyon, creating a patchwork of shadows and brightness that shifted with the movement of clouds. Evan positioned himself behind a fallen cottonwood trunk about 50 yards from where the canyon forked. Good cover, clear sight lines down both branches. If the men split up, he'd see them coming. If they stayed together, he'd know which direction they chose. He settled in to wait, the rifle cool and familiar in his hands. Catherine had hated guns. Had asked him once, early in their courtship, if he'd ever killed anyone. He told her the truth, yes, but only when there was no other choice. She'd accepted that. Accepted him, scars and all. He wondered what she'd think of him now, if she'd approve of the violence he was about to commit in their daughter's name, or if she'd see it as proof that she'd been right to run, right to keep Lila away from the darkness that clung to him like a shadow. Didn't matter. Catherine was gone. Lila was here, and those men were coming to hurt her. Everything else was just noise. The first man appeared at the fork maybe 20 minutes later, moving careful and low, rifle at the ready. He paused at the junction, peering up each branch, trying to decide. Behind him, Evan could hear the other two approaching, their boots scraping on stone. The lead man chose the right fork, the wrong one, the one that dead-ended after a quarter-mile at a sheer cliff face. He signaled to the others and disappeared into the shadows. Two left. And they'd chosen the path toward the alcove. Evan shifted position silently, moving to intercept. The canyon narrowed here, the walls closing in until the passage was barely 6 feet wide. A choke point, perfect for an ambush. He found a cluster of boulders and wedged himself between them, the rifle barrel resting on stone, aimed down the passage. From here he could see maybe 30 feet before the path curved. Not much, but enough. The gray-bearded man came around the curve first, moving with practiced caution. The third man followed 5 paces behind, younger, nervous, his rifle sweeping back and forth. Evan waited. Patience was a weapon all its own. Let them come closer. Let them commit to the narrow passage where they couldn't spread out, couldn't use their numbers. 20 feet, 50, 10. The graybeard stopped suddenly, hand raised. He'd seen something, a scuff mark in the dirt maybe, or some instinct born of long experience. His eyes scanned the shadows. "Someone's here," he said quietly. "I can feel it." "Maybe they went the other way." "No, they're close." The graybeard's voice was certain, real close. Evan made his choice. He could wait, hope they turned back, avoid the confrontation. Or he could end this now, on his terms. He stood up from behind the boulder. Both men spun toward him, rifles coming up fast. But Evan was already moving, already firing. The Winchester cracked twice in rapid succession. The younger man went down hard, rifle clattering on stone. The graybeard dove behind a rock outcropping, returning fire. A bullet spanged off the boulder next to Evan's head, spraying stone fragments. Evan dropped low and rolled, coming up in a new position. Fired again. The round punched through the edge of the graybeard's cover, forcing him to shift. Another shot. Another. Keeping the man pinned, unable to aim properly. The rifle clicked empty. Evan dropped it and drew the revolver. 6 rounds, make them count. The graybeard was trying to circle, using the rocks for cover, working toward a flanking angle. Smart, experienced, dangerous. A shout echoed from deeper in the canyon. The third man, the one who'd gone down the wrong fork, now coming back fast. Evan had maybe 30 seconds before he was caught between them. He stepped out from behind the boulder, fully exposed, and fired 3 times at the graybeard's position, not trying to hit, just forcing the man to keep his head down. Then he turned and ran, heading back up toward the alcove, boots pounding on stone. Behind him, the graybeard shouted, "He's running! Cut him off!" Gunfire erupted, bullets whining off the canyon walls. Evan zigged and zagged, using every scrap of cover, not bothering to return fire. He needed distance, needed to get these men away from Lila. The canyon opened up ahead, the path splitting again. Evan took the left branch, the one that climbed steeply upward along a narrow ledge. Treacherous footing, especially in the dark, but he knew this route, had scouted it thoroughly. The men following him didn't. Halfway up the ledge, Evan stopped and turned. The graybeard appeared below, breathing hard, rifle raised. They locked eyes across 30 feet of empty air. "You're protecting a lie," the graybeard called up. "The woman stole from us. The girl knows where she hid it. That's all we want. Give us the girl, and you walk away." "No. You don't even know her. She's nothing to you." "She's everything," Evan said quietly. Then louder. "She's my daughter." The graybeard's eyes widened slightly. "Well, that does complicate things. It simplifies them. You want her, you go through me." "That can be arranged." The graybeard raised his rifle. Evan fired first. The revolver bucked in his hand. The graybeard jerked back, rifle discharging into the air as he stumbled. But he didn't fall. The bullet had hit his shoulder, disabling his gun arm but not killing him. The third man appeared at the base of the ledge, rifle up and firing. Evan threw himself flat, rolling behind an outcropping as bullets chewed the stone where he'd been standing. 2 rounds left in the revolver. No rifle. And 2 armed men below who knew exactly where he was. Not good. He needed to change the equation, needed to reduce their numbers. Evan looked up. The canyon wall rose another 40 feet above the ledge, cracks and handholds barely visible in the moonlight. Impossible to climb in daylight, suicidal at night, which meant they wouldn't expect it. He holstered the revolver and started climbing. His fingers found holds by memory and desperation, boots scraping for purchase. 20 feet up, 30. Below, he heard the graybeard cursing, directing the other man to follow up the ledge. Evan kept climbing, muscles screaming, lungs burning. A gunshot. Stone exploded next to his hand. They'd spotted him. He hauled himself over the rim and collapsed on flat ground, gasping. No time. Had to keep moving. This plateau connected to another trail, one that would loop back down toward the alcove from a different angle. Evan ran through the darkness, praying he remembered the route correctly. One wrong step would send him over a cliff edge he couldn't see. The trail descended sharply, switchbacking down through loose scree. Evan half slid, half fell, somehow staying upright. At the bottom, he recognized where he was, maybe 100 yards from the alcove, approaching from above rather than below. He drew the revolver, 2 bullets. Make them count. Lila was still there, exactly where he'd left her, pressed against the wall. But she wasn't alone. The younger man, the one Evan had shot first, was on his feet again, wounded but alive, one hand pressed to his bleeding side while the other held a pistol aimed at Lila's head. "Drop it," he said when Evan appeared. His voice shook with pain and fear, but his gun hand was steady enough. "Drop it, or I paint these walls with her." Evan froze. Lila's eyes found his across the space, wide and terrified, but still dry, still determined not to cry. "Easy," Evan said, letting the revolver dangle from one finger. "Easy now. Don't do anything stupid. Put the gun on the ground, slow." Evan knelt, placed the revolver on Stone. "There, see? Just talk. We can talk about this." "Nothing to talk about. The girl's coming with me. You try to follow, she dies." "She's 12 years old. She doesn't know anything." "That's what you think. But kids see things, hear things. Her mother told her something before she died. I know it." The young man's face was pale, his shirt dark with blood. "Now step back, way back." Evan took 2 steps backward, mind racing through possibilities. The distance was too great. Even if he dove for the gun, the young man would have time to fire, and at this range he wouldn't miss. "You're hurt," Evan said, stalling. "You need a doctor. Let the girl go and I'll help you get to town." "Shut up, just shut up," the young man's voice cracked. "This wasn't supposed to happen. We were just supposed to find some papers, get our money back. Nobody was supposed to die." "Then don't make it worse. Don't kill a child." "I'm not going to kill her. Unless you make me." He grabbed Lila's arm and hauled her upright. She gasped in pain but didn't resist. "We're leaving now. You stay right there. Don't move. Don't follow." He started backing away, dragging Lila with him. She stumbled on the uneven ground and the young man yanked her roughly upright. Evan's hands clenched into fists. They'd made it maybe 10 feet when Lila spoke. "My mother didn't steal from you." The young man paused. "What?" "She didn't steal from you. Her brother did. Jack Brennan. He took evidence because you were murderers, because you killed innocent men for their claims." Lila's voice was steady, certain. "And he gave it to Mama before he died. She kept it all these years because she knew if she destroyed it, you'd kill her anyway. It was insurance." "Where is it?" The young man's grip tightened on her arm. "Where'd she hide it?" "I don't know. She never told me. She said it was better if I didn't know. Safer." Lila looked directly at Evan. "But she told me something else. She said if bad men ever came for me, I should trust you to do what was right, because you always did what was right, even when it was hard." The young man laughed bitterly. "Real touching. Doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," Lila said quietly. Then she drove her elbow hard into his wounded side. The young man screamed and his gun hand wavered. Lila tore free and dove to the side. Evan was already moving, covering the distance in 3 long strides. The young man's pistol came back up, but Evan was faster, batting it aside and driving his fist into the man's wounded ribs. The young man went down hard, the gun skittering across Stone. Evan kicked it away and dropped on top of him, one hand around his throat. Please, the young man choked out. Please don't. Evan's hand tightened. The rage was there, hot and fierce, demanding blood for blood. It would be so easy, so justified. Don't kill him. Lila's voice, small and scared but absolutely certain. Evan looked up. She stood a few feet away, the blue quilt wrapped around her shoulders, her face streaked with tears she was finally allowing to fall. He tried to hurt you, Evan said roughly. I know, but he's scared and he's hurt, and killing him won't bring Mama back. She wiped at her eyes. Mama said you were a good man. She said you'd protect me, not turn me into something like them. The words hit like a physical blow. Evan's hand loosened on the young man's throat. The rage drained away, leaving only exhaustion and grief. He stood up, retrieved the revolver, and aimed it at the young man's head. Tell your friends it's over. The girl doesn't know where the evidence is. Even if she did, you'd have to go through me to get to her. And I promise you, I've got nothing left to lose and no reason to show mercy. You come for her again, I won't stop with wounding. We clear? The young man nodded frantically, clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. Get out of my sight! He scrambled up and limped away into the darkness, leaving a trail of blood on the stone. Evan stood there breathing hard, the gun still in his hand, watching until the man disappeared. Then he turned to Lila. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, shock setting in. He crossed to her and pulled her against him. She buried her face in his chest and finally, let herself break. I've got you, Evan said into her hair. You're safe, I've got you. They stood like that for a long time, father and daughter, while the moon set and the canyon filled with darkness. Somewhere out there, the gray-bearded man and his wounded companion were retreating, carrying their dead and their failure back out into the basin. Let them go. Let them tell whoever needed hearing that Evan Holt's daughter was off limits, that some things weren't worth the cost. Morning would come soon. They'd need to move again, find somewhere more permanent, somewhere those men couldn't find them. But for now, in this moment, they were alive, together. And that was enough. They waited in the alcove until the sky turned from black to gray, neither of them sleeping, just sitting close together wrapped in the blue quilt. Lila had finally stopped shaking, but she stayed pressed against Evan's side, as if proximity alone could keep the darkness at bay. He kept one arm around her shoulders and the rifle across his knees, listening to the canyon wake around them, birdsong echoing off stone, the rush of water over rocks, wind moving through the cottonwoods like whispered conversation. When full dawn came, pale and cold, Evan finally stirred. His body ached from the night's violence, old wounds and new bruises making themselves known. He was too old for this, had been too old for it even when he was young. We should go, he said quietly. Put more distance between us and them. Lila nodded against his shoulder but didn't move immediately. When she did speak, her voice was small. Did I do the right thing, telling you not to kill him? Evan was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the weight it deserved. Your mother would have said yes. She believed in mercy, in giving people chances to be better than their worst moments. What do you believe? I believe that man would have killed you without a second thought if circumstances were different. I believe mercy is a luxury people like us can't always afford. He looked down at her, at Catherine's eyes and a face that was trying so hard to be brave. But I also believe your mother was right about most things. And if she thought I was worth saving from becoming something darker, maybe that young man is too. That's not really an answer. A ghost of a smile touched Evan's face. No, I guess it's not. But it's the best I've got right now. He stood, joints protesting, and offered her his hand. Come on, we need to move before they decide to come back with reinforcements. They saddled the horses and led them down through the canyon, moving slowly in the early light. Evan kept alert for any sign of an ambush, but the canyon was empty. The men had truly gone. At the entrance, he found what he was looking for, blood trail leading east, back toward the main road. Heavy enough that he knew the young man wouldn't make it far without help. The graybeard would have to choose between pursuing Evan and saving his companion. Evan hoped he chose the latter, not out of mercy, but because he needed time. Time to think, time to plan, time to figure out how to keep a 12-year-old girl alive in a world that wanted her dead for secrets she didn't even possess. They rode south through the morning, following game trails and dry washes, avoiding anything that looked like a road. The storm had passed, leaving the basin washed clean and bright. Puddles reflected the sky like scattered mirrors. The air smelled of wet sage and possibility. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat, cold beans and hard biscuit, not much but enough. Lila ate mechanically, her mind clearly elsewhere. Evan watched her, seeing Catherine in every gesture, every expression, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she chewed her lower lip when thinking, small echoes of a woman he'd loved and lost. "Tell me about her," Evan said finally. "Your mother, what was she like these past years?" Lila looked up, surprised. Then something in her face softened, remembering. Tired. She was always tired, but she tried to hide it. She'd make up games to teach me things, spelling contests for new words, math problems disguised as riddles. She said education was the one thing nobody could take from me. She was right about that, too. We moved a lot. Never stayed anywhere more than a few months. She'd find work wherever we landed, cleaning, mending, sometimes cooking. She was good with her hands, could make something beautiful out of almost nothing. Lila pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. She made this quilt during a winter in Montana. We were living in a one-room cabin that leaked when it rained. She'd work on it by candlelight after she thought I was asleep, said it reminded her of better times. Evan's throat tightened. Did she ever talk about me? About us? Sometimes, late at night when she was sad. She'd tell me about a ranch you wanted to build together, about horses you'd raise and gardens she'd plant. She said you made her feel safe, that when she was with you, the world made sense. Lila's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She cried when she talked about leaving you, said it was the hardest thing she'd ever done. She did it to protect me. I understand that now. Do you? Lila's eyes searched his face. Because I don't. If she loved you and you loved her, you should have been together. You should have fought those men together. Instead, she ran and you thought she was dead, and I grew up without a father. How is that protecting anyone? The question held no accusation, just genuine confusion. The bewilderment of a child trying to make sense of adult decisions that had shaped her entire life. Evan chose his words carefully. Your mother and I both had pasts that came with consequences. My past involved men who wanted me dead for things I'd done. Her past involved men who wanted her dead for things her brother had done. Together, we would have been twice as easy to find, twice as vulnerable. She made a choice, a hard choice, to give you the best chance at life, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. She sacrificed you. Yes. Was it worth it? All those years alone? Evan looked at this girl, his daughter, sitting in the dust of a nowhere canyon, wrapped in her dead mother's quilt, asking questions that had no good answers. I don't know. Ask me again when you're older, when you've had to make impossible choices of your own. Lila was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then, the evidence those men want. Do you know what it is? Yes. Assay reports and claim documents proving they murdered legitimate miners and stole their stakes. Your Uncle Jack was a prospector who discovered what they were doing. He tried to expose them, and they tried to kill him for it. He escaped with the evidence and brought it to your mother for safekeeping. Why didn't she just give it to the law? Because the law was bought and paid for in those days, still is in some places. Those men had money, influence, connections. Your mother had nothing but the truth, and truth doesn't count for much when the people who are supposed to enforce it are on the payroll. Evan stood and brushed the dust from his pants. She kept the evidence as insurance. As long as she had it, they couldn't kill her outright. They needed to find it first. But she's dead now, so why are they still hunting me? Because they think she told you where it's hidden, and maybe because they're the kind of men who don't leave loose ends. Evan walked to his horse and checked the saddle straps. We need to assume they won't stop. Not until they're convinced you're not a threat. How do we convince them of that? By finding the evidence ourselves and using it the way your mother should have 13 years ago. We expose what they did, publicly, loudly, make it so well known that killing us becomes more dangerous than leaving us alive. Lila stood, hope flickering in her eyes. Can we do that? I don't know, but we can try. Evan swung into his saddle. First, we need to get somewhere safe. Somewhere we can rest and think and plan without looking over our shoulders every minute. Where? Redemption, the town I mentioned last night. It's about 30 miles southeast. We can make it by tomorrow evening if we push hard. They rode through the afternoon, the landscape gradually shifting from canyon country to rolling grassland dotted with rocky outcroppings. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant pine forests. Evan kept them moving at a steady pace, stopping frequently to scan the horizon for riders. The basin was vast and empty, but emptiness could hide many things. As the sun began its descent, painting the grass gold and the sky orange, they crested a rise and saw something unexpected in the distance. A wagon, stopped at an angle, one wheel clearly broken. A woman stood beside it, shading her eyes against the sun, watching their approach. Evan's hand moved to his rifle. "Easy," Lila said quietly. "She might need help, or it might be a trap. Look at her, she's alone, no weapons I can see." Evan studied the scene. The woman was middle-aged, heavy-set, dressed in plain homespun. The wagon was loaded with household goods, furniture, crates, bundles of clothing. A genuine breakdown, as far as he could tell, but he'd been fooled before. They approached cautiously, Evan keeping the rifle visible across his saddle. The woman watched them come, hands at her sides, posture non-threatening. "Afternoon," she called when they were close enough. Her voice was rough from thirst and exhaustion. "I don't suppose you folks know anything about fixing wheels." Evan reined in about 20 feet away. "What happened?" "Hit a rut about 2 hours back. Wheel split clean through. I've been trying to figure out how to fix it, but I'm not exactly skilled in carpentry." She gestured helplessly at the wagon. "My husband died last month. I'm heading to Denver to stay with my sister. Thought I could manage the trip alone. Turns out I was wrong about that." Lila looked at Evan. He could see the question in her eyes, the same compassion that Catherine had carried. Help or move on? Safety or humanity? He dismounted. "Let me take a look." The wheel was beyond repair, cracked through the hub, 2 spokes broken. But the spare wheel strapped to the wagon's underside was sound. It was just a matter of jacking up the wagon, removing the broken wheel, and mounting the replacement. Hard work, but not complicated. "I can fix this," Evan said, "but it'll take an hour, maybe more." The woman's face flooded with relief. "Oh, thank heaven. I'll pay you, of course. I don't have much, but—" "Don't need payment. Just stay out of the way and let me work." While Evan worked, Lila helped the woman organize the scattered goods that had tumbled from the wagon during the breakdown. They talked quietly, the woman's voice carrying on the wind. Her name was Ruth. Her husband had been a shopkeeper in a small town north of here. They'd planned to retire to Denver together, but pneumonia had taken him before they could make the move. Now she was making the journey alone, carrying everything they'd owned in a wagon that was falling apart around her. "You're lucky these folks came along," Ruth said to Lila. "Your father seems like a capable man." Lila glanced at Evan, something complicated crossing her face. "Yes, he is." "Where are you headed?" "Redemption." "That's a fair piece. You have family there?" "No, just looking for a fresh start." Ruth nodded knowingly. "Aren't we all, child? Aren't we all?" By the time Evan finished installing the spare wheel, the sun was touching the western horizon. He stood and wiped the grease from his hands, his back aching from the work. "Thank you," Ruth said, and there were tears in her eyes. "Truly, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." "You would have figured it out. People do." Evan gathered his tools and returned them to his saddlebag. "Road to Denver's pretty clear from here. You should make good time. Will you camp with me tonight? It's getting dark, and there's safety in numbers. I have stew I can share." "It's not much, but it's hot." Evan started to refuse. Every hour they delayed was an hour those men could use to circle back, to pick up their trail. But Lila was exhausted, her face drawn and pale. And the horses needed rest. And maybe, just maybe, one night of normal human kindness would help heal something in both of them. "All right," he heard himself say. "One night." They made camp beside the wagon as darkness fell. Ruth built a fire and heated the stew, venison and root vegetables, thick and savory. They ate in companionable silence, 3 strangers brought together by chance and necessity. The stars emerged, bright and countless, and the prairie stretched away in all directions like a dark ocean. After dinner, Ruth pulled out a harmonica and played slow, melancholy songs that spoke of loneliness and longing and the long roads people traveled. Leela sat close to the fire, the quilt around her shoulders, listening with her eyes half closed. Evan stood at the edge of the firelight, keeping watch, the rifle never far from his hand. But as the night deepened and no threats emerged, he found himself relaxing incrementally. Found himself remembering what it felt like to sit among people without fear or suspicion, to share a meal and a fire and simple humanity. Catherine would have liked this, he thought, would have appreciated Ruth's kindness, her strength in the face of loss, would have wanted Lila to see that not everyone in the world was hunting them, that goodness still existed, even in hard times. "Your daughter's lovely," Ruth said quietly, appearing beside him. "You must be very proud." "I am." The words came easier than he'd expected. "She has sad eyes, though, like she's seen too much too young." "She has." Ruth nodded, not prying, accepting the limits of what Evan would share. "Well, she's lucky to have you. A girl needs her father, especially in times like these." "I'm the one who's lucky," Evan said, and meant it. Later, when Ruth had gone to sleep in the wagon and the fire had burned down to embers, Lila came and sat beside Evan. They watched the stars together, father and daughter, bound by blood and circumstance, and a dead woman's final request. "Do you think Mama's watching?" Lila asked softly. "I don't know. Maybe. I hope she is. I hope she knows I found you, that you're keeping me safe like she asked." Evan's arm went around her shoulders, pulling her close. "She knows. Wherever she is, she knows." They sat like that until Lila fell asleep against his side, her breathing slow and even, her face finally peaceful. Evan stayed awake, watching the horizon, keeping vigil, protecting what mattered. Dawn came gray and cool, the prairie emerging from darkness in gradual stages. Ruth was already awake, packing her wagon for the road ahead. She fed them breakfast, biscuits and bacon, coffee thick and strong, and when they were ready to leave, she pressed a small package into Lila's hands. "For the road," she said. "Just some dried fruit and jerky. Not much, but it might help." "Thank you," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. "Take care of each other," Ruth told them. "That's all we can do in this world. Take care of each other, and hope it's enough." They parted ways at the crossroads, Ruth heading west toward Denver, Evan and Lila continuing southeast toward Redemption. Evan watched the wagon disappear into the distance, feeling something like regret. Ruth was heading toward family, toward connection and belonging. They were heading toward uncertainty. But it was the only path available, so they took it. The country grew more settled as they traveled, signs of civilization appearing in increasing frequency, fences marking property lines, cattle grazing in managed herds, the smoke of distant homesteads. By mid-afternoon, they could see Redemption in the distance, a cluster of buildings huddled against the prairie like something hoping not to be noticed. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 36 structures total, a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith. Residential houses scattered behind, most of them small and weathered. The kind of place people passed through rather than settled in, unless they had nowhere else to go. Perfect. They rode in as the sun angled toward evening, attracting only mild curiosity from the few people on the street. A man loading supplies onto a wagon, a woman sweeping her porch, children playing in the dust. Normal life, mundane and ordinary, and utterly foreign after days of running. The boarding house sat at the end of the main street, 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a sign that simply read, "Margaret's." Evan tied the horses at the rail and helped Lila down. She stood looking at the building with something like trepidation. "What if she doesn't help us?" she whispered. "She will." "How do you know?" "Because I once helped her when no one else would. She's not the type to forget that." The inside of the boarding house was clean and spare, simple furniture, whitewashed walls, the smell of bread baking. A woman emerged from the back, wiping her hands on an apron. She was maybe 50, rail-thin, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes landed on Evan and widened in recognition. "Well," Margaret Crane said slowly. I'll be damned. Evan Holt, I thought you were dead. Not yet. Close enough from the looks of you. Her gaze shifted to Lila. And who's this? My daughter, Lila. Evan's hand rested on Lila's shoulder. We need help, Margaret. A place to stay. Just for a few days while I figure things out. Margaret's sharp eyes moved between them, reading the situation with the practiced ease of someone who'd survived by understanding subtext. You in trouble? Yes. The kind that follows? Maybe. I'll understand if you say no. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then she sighed and shook her head. You saved my life once, Evan Holt. Pulled me out of a burning building when everyone else ran the other way. Figure I owe you at least a few days of refuge. She gestured toward the stairs. Last room on the right, clean linens in the closet, supper's at 6. Relief flooded through Evan, so intense it left him momentarily unsteady. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If your trouble shows up here, we're going to have words. But her expression softened slightly as she looked at Lila. Child looks half-starved. I'll bring up some food before supper. The room was small but clean. 2 narrow beds, a washstand, a window overlooking the street. Lila sat on one of the beds and looked around with something like wonder. We're staying here? She asked. For now. It's nice. It was barely functional, but Evan understood what she meant. After days of sleeping on the ground, running for their lives, this simple room with its clean sheets and solid walls felt like sanctuary. He moved to the window and looked out at Redemption's main street. A few people moved about in the fading light, conducting the ordinary business of ordinary lives. No one looked threatening. No one seemed interested in the boarding house or its new residents. Maybe they'd made it. Maybe they'd bought enough time to breathe, to plan, to figure out their next move. Or maybe the storm was still coming, just delayed, gathering strength before it hit. Either way, for tonight, they were safe. For tonight, they could rest. Evan turned from the window to find Lila already asleep, still wearing her dusty dress, the blue quilt pulled up to her chin. He stood watching her for a long moment, this daughter he'd known for less than 2 days, who'd already become the center of everything. Catherine had given him an impossible gift, a reason to live when he'd spent 7 years just surviving, a future when he'd thought his was already written. He would not waste it. Whatever came next, whoever came next, they would face it together. Father and daughter. The way it should have been from the beginning. The way it would be from now on. Outside, the sun set and Redemption settled into evening quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new dangers. But tonight, in this small room above a boarding house in a town barely worth naming, Evan Holt allowed himself something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting up through the floorboards. Evan woke to find Lila already up, standing at the window, watching Redemption wake. She'd washed her face and tried to comb her tangled hair with her fingers, but she still wore the same calico dress, torn, stained, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and hem. We need to get you some clothes, Evan said, sitting up. Every muscle in his body protested the movement, reminders of the canyon fight written in bruises and stiffness. Lila turned from the window. I don't have any money. I do. Some. Enough for the basics. He'd been careful over the years, saving what little the ranch brought in, keeping emergency funds hidden in his saddlebag. Never thought he'd be using it to buy dresses for a daughter he didn't know he had. They went down to breakfast to find Margaret setting out plates. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread, butter that was actual butter instead of lard. 4 other boarders sat at the long table, a mix of men and women who nodded politely but didn't pry. The kind of people who understood that in a place like this, everyone had a story they weren't sharing. Margaret poured coffee and studied Lila with the sharp assessment of a woman who'd raised children of her own. That dress has seen better days. We're going to the general store after breakfast, Evan said. Good. Tell Frank I sent you. He'll give you fair prices. Margaret set down the coffee pot. And when you're done with that, come find me. I might have some work for you if you're interested. Nothing much, just basic repairs around the place. But it pays room and board and a little extra. Evan met her eyes across the table, reading the subtext. She was offering cover, a reason for them to be here that wouldn't attract questions. A man doing odd jobs for a boarding house wasn't worth noticing. A man on the run with a child. That invited curiosity. I appreciate that, he said quietly. After breakfast, they walked to the general store, Lila staying close to Evan's side. The town looked different in daylight, less anonymous, more exposed. People watched them pass with the casual interest of small-town residents cataloging newcomers. An old man whittling on a bench, two women chatting outside the church, a boy leading a mule down the street. Normal, ordinary, the kind of place where violence seemed impossible. But Evan had learned long ago that violence was possible everywhere. It was just better hidden in some places than others. The general store was dim and crowded, shelves packed with everything from canned goods to saddles. A thin man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. Help you? Margaret sent us. Need some clothes for my daughter. Frank's expression warmed slightly at Margaret's name. Sure. Got some ready-made dresses in the back. Nothing fancy, but they're sturdy. What size? Lila tried on 3 dresses before finding one that fit. Simple brown cotton with small white flowers, practical and plain. Evan added undergarments, stockings, a second dress in dark blue, a warm coat for when winter came. The total made his emergency funds considerably lighter, but seeing Lila's face when she looked at herself in the cracked mirror made it worth every penny. I look normal, she said softly, wonder in her voice. You look like yourself, Evan corrected. That's better than normal. They were leaving the store when the door opened and a man walked in, tall, weathered, with a silver star pinned to his vest. The town marshal. His eyes passed over Evan and Lila with professional assessment, lingering just long enough to catalog and categorize before moving on. Frank, he said with a nod. Marshal Garrett, what can I do for you? Just checking in. Any strangers come through recently? Evan felt Lila tense beside him. He put a casual hand on her shoulder, kept his expression neutral. Just a father and daughter out shopping. Nothing to see. Usual traffic, Frank said, not looking at them. Couple of drummers heading west. That widow woman passed through last week. Oh, and Evan here is helping Margaret with some repairs at the boarding house. The marshal's attention came back to Evan. That right? Yes, sir. You from around here? No, sir. Wyoming, up north. Ranch burned in a lightning strike. Figured I'd head south, find work until I can rebuild. The lie came smooth and easy, polished by years of practice. The marshal studied him for a long moment, and Evan met his gaze steadily. Nothing to hide, just a man down on his luck making the best of bad circumstances. Well, the marshal said finally, welcome to redemption. Hope you find it suits you. Thank you, sir. The marshal bought tobacco and left. Evan waited until he was well down the street before releasing the breath he'd been holding. He believed you, Lila whispered. People believe what makes sense to them. Man with a daughter looking for work, that makes sense. Man on the run from killers, that's harder to accept. Evan guided her toward the door. Come on, let's get back before Margaret thinks we ran off with her goodwill. They spent the afternoon working around the boarding house. Evan fixed a broken shutter, replaced rotted boards on the back porch, rehung a door that had been dragging. Simple work, the kind that required hands and patience but not much thought. It felt good to build instead of destroy, to make something better instead of tearing it apart. Lila helped Margaret in the kitchen, learning to knead bread and peel potatoes. Through the window, Evan could hear them talking, Margaret's rough voice mixing with Lila's softer one, questions and answers, the ordinary conversation of women working side by side. Catherine would have liked this too, would have wanted Lila to learn practical skills, to have a woman's guidance. Margaret was hard and weathered, but there was kindness beneath the severity, the kind of woman who'd survived by being tougher than her circumstances. As the sun angled toward evening, Evan was finishing the porch repairs when he noticed the rider approaching from the east. Just one man, moving at an easy pace, no urgency or threat in his posture. But Evan's hand moved to the revolver at his hip anyway, old instincts refusing to sleep. The rider stopped at the boarding house and dismounted, a lean man in his 30s, dressed in range clothes that had seen hard use. His face was sun-darkened and scarred, the kind of weathering that came from years outdoors in all conditions. He tied his horse and looked up at Evan on the porch. You Evan Holt? Evan's pulse quickened, but his voice stayed level. Who's asking? Name's Cole Mathis. Margaret said I'd find you here. He climbed the porch steps and extended his hand. I'm the one who usually does repairs around this place. Heard you were filling in. Evan shook his hand, reassessing. Not a threat, just a man defending his territory. I can move on if I'm stepping on toes. Nah, it's fine. I've got steady work at the Branson Ranch these days. Can't always get away to help Margaret like I used to. Cole leaned against the railing, studying Evan with open curiosity. She says you're good with your hands, says you fixed that door she's been complaining about for 6 months. It needed new hinges, that's all. Still, most men can't be bothered with the details. Cole pulled out a pouch of tobacco and began rolling a cigarette. Look, reason I came by. There's a man in town asking questions. Showed up this morning, been talking to folks all day. Older fellow, gray beard, looks like he's been in a fight recently. Shoulder all bandaged up. Every muscle in Evan's body went tight. What's he asking about? A man and a girl, says he's tracking family, but... Cole lit the cigarette and took a drag. I've seen enough bounty hunters and claim jumpers to know when someone's hunting. He's got that look. Did you tell him anything? Nothing to tell. Far as I know, you're just some drifter helping Margaret. Cole's eyes were sharp beneath the brim of his hat. But I figured you should know he's here in case you needed to make any decisions about your future in redemption. Evan's mind raced. The graybeard had tracked them somehow, despite the rain, despite their precautions. Either he was better than Evan had given him credit for, or they'd left a trail more obvious than he'd thought. Didn't matter which. What mattered was that he was here, and he was asking questions. Where is he now? Last I saw, he was at the saloon. Drinking alone, watching the street. Cole flicked ash over the railing. Marshal Garrett doesn't know about any trouble yet. But if shooting starts, that'll change real quick. Garrett's a fair man, but he doesn't tolerate violence in his town. I don't want violence. Nobody ever does. But it has a way of finding people anyway. Cole straightened from the railing. I don't know your story, Holt, and I'm not asking, but Margaret's good people. Don't bring trouble to her door if you can help it. I won't. Cole nodded and headed for his horse, paused with one foot in the stirrup. There's a trail behind the church that leads out to the eastern road, less visible than the main street if someone needed to leave town quiet-like. Appreciated. Cole mounted and rode off, leaving Evan alone on the porch with the weight of impossible choices. Stay and risk confrontation in a town that didn't deserve the violence. Run and confirm every suspicion the graybeard had about their guilt. Fight and possibly bring the law down on both of them. No good options, just degrees of bad. He found Margaret in the kitchen, pulling fresh bread from the oven. Lila was setting the table for supper, her new brown dress already dusted with flour. We need to talk, Evan said quietly. Margaret took one look at his face and nodded. Lila, go upstairs and wash up for supper. But I'm not... Now, child. Lila obeyed, casting worried glances at Evan as she climbed the stairs. When she was gone, Margaret set down the bread and crossed her arms. How bad? Man asking questions. One of the ones hunting us. He's at the saloon. Cole told you. Yes. And you're thinking about running. I'm thinking about keeping you in this town safe, which means running, yes. Margaret was quiet for a moment, her weathered face thoughtful. You saved my life 7 years ago, Evan Holt. Pulled me out of a burning building and nearly died doing it. You know what I remember most about that night? Evan shook his head. Afterward, when the building was ash and the fire was out, you asked me if I had anyone, family, friends, anywhere to go. I said no, I'd lost everything. And you gave me money, every penny you had on you, and told me to start over somewhere safe. Said everyone deserved a second chance. Margaret's eyes were fierce. You gave me that chance. Let me return the favor. This isn't the same. It's exactly the same. You and that girl, you need time. Need a chance to figure things out without men with guns breathing down your necks. So you stay here tonight. Stay quiet. And I'll handle the man asking questions. Margaret, I'm not some fragile flower, Evan. I've dealt with worse than one wounded man with a grudge. She moved to the stove and began ladling stew into bowls. Now, go get your daughter and eat supper, and stop looking like a man heading to his own hanging. They ate in tense silence, Lila picking at her food, sensing the undercurrent of worry. The other boarders talked among themselves, oblivious to the drama playing out in quiet glances and unspoken fears. After supper, Evan sent Lila upstairs and positioned himself at the front window, watching the street. The sun set, painting the buildings gold and red. Lamps were lit. The saloon across the street glowed with warm light and the sound of rough laughter. Margaret appeared beside him, pulling on a shawl. "I'm going over there. Don't you dare follow me." "What are you going to do?" "Something I should have done years ago." Her smile was grim. "Remind a man what it costs to threaten good people." She crossed the street before Evan could argue, walking with the confidence of a woman who'd survived too much to be intimidated by one more danger. He watched her push through the saloon doors and disappear inside. 15 minutes passed. 20. Evan's hand never left his revolver. Then Margaret emerged, alone, walking back across the street at the same measured pace. She came inside and closed the door behind her, brushed imaginary dust from her skirt. "It's handled." "What did you do?" "Told him that strangers asking threatening questions tend to have accidents in redemption. Fires, mostly. Buildings burn so easily when the wrong people get careless with their cigarettes." Margaret's expression was serene. "Also mentioned that Marshal Garrett takes a dim view of bounty hunters operating in his jurisdiction without proper documentation, and that the telegraph operator is my nephew, who'd be happy to wire the territorial marshal about any suspicious activity." "He believed you?" "Didn't have much choice. I may look like someone's grandmother, but I've got a reputation in this town. Built it deliberately over 7 years. She patted Evan's arm. "He'll leave. Probably tonight. And if he's smart, he won't come back." Evan stared at her, this rail-thin woman who'd just stared down an armed man through sheer force of will and carefully cultivated intimidation. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just keep fixing things around here and let that girl upstairs have a few weeks of normal. That's payment enough." She retired to her room, leaving Evan at the window. He watched for another hour, until he saw the gray-bearded man emerge from the saloon, mount his horse, and ride east out of town. Moving slow, favoring his wounded shoulder, but moving. Gone. Evan finally breathed, really breathed, for what felt like the first time in days. He climbed the stairs to find Lila sitting on her bed, still dressed, clearly waiting. She looked up when he entered, fear and hope warring in her expression. "Is he gone?" "Yes." "For good?" "I don't know. Maybe." Evan sat on the other bed, suddenly exhausted. "But we're safe tonight. That's something." Lila was quiet for a moment, picking at the quilt spread across her lap. "I'm scared all the time now. Even when nothing bad is happening, I'm scared it will. Is it always going to be like this?" The question deserved honesty, not comfort. "I don't know. Your mother spent 12 years running. That's a long time to live in fear. How did she stand it?" "She had you. Purpose makes fear bearable." Evan looked at his daughter, at Catherine's eyes reflecting lamplight. And maybe she hoped that someday it would end, that she'd find the evidence or destroy it, or figure out some way to make it stop mattering. "Do you think the evidence still exists, or did it burn with her?" It was the question Evan had been avoiding since he'd read Catherine's letter. If the evidence was gone, then Lila was being hunted for nothing. But if it still existed somewhere, hidden, waiting to be found, that changed everything. "Your mother was careful," he said slowly. "Deliberate. She wouldn't have kept something that dangerous with her, not where it could be destroyed in a fire or stolen if she was robbed. She would have hidden it somewhere safe, somewhere those men couldn't reach even if they found it." "Where?" "I don't know. But I'm going to figure it out." Evan stood and moved to the window, looking out at Redemption's quiet streets. "Your Uncle Jack, your mother's brother, he died in Cheyenne. That's where they'd been living when he brought her the evidence. If she hid it anywhere, that's where she would have done it, before she ran. That was 13 years ago. Whatever she hid could be long gone by now. Maybe. Or maybe it's still there waiting, only one way to find out." Lila stood and came to stand beside him at the window. "Are we going to Cheyenne?" "Eventually, but not yet. We need to rest, recover, plan properly instead of just reacting." Evan put his arm around her shoulders. Margaret bought us time. Let's use it. The next few weeks settled into something almost resembling normal life. Evan worked around the boarding house, fixing what was broken, improving what could be better. Lila helped Margaret with cooking and cleaning, learned to sew and mend, absorbed the practical wisdom of a woman who'd survived by being useful. In the evenings, they'd sit together in their small room, and Lila would tell stories about Catherine, memories of places they'd lived, things her mother had taught her, small moments that painted a picture of a life Evan had never known. He listened and grieved and felt grateful all at once for this window into the years he'd lost. Gradually, carefully, he told her stories too. About his own past, edited for a child's ears but honest in the ways that mattered. About the violence he'd known, the choices he'd made, the reasons he'd been trying so hard to become someone different when he'd met Catherine. "Mama was right about you," Lila said one evening. "You are dangerous, but you're also kind. I didn't know those things could exist in the same person. Most people are contradictions. We're just better at hiding some parts than others." But redemption itself proved surprisingly welcoming once people accepted that Evan and Lila were staying. The marshal nodded to them on the street. Frank at the general store started extending credit. The preacher invited them to Sunday services, which they attended once to be polite and then quietly declined further invitations. Cole Mathis stopped by occasionally, ostensibly to check on repairs but really to share news and gossip. No more strangers asking questions. No sign of the gray-bearded man or his companions. The world beyond redemption's borders remained quiet. Too quiet, part of Evan's mind whispered. But he pushed the suspicion aside. They'd earned this peace, fragile as it was. 6 weeks after their arrival, on a cool morning in early summer, Evan was replacing shingles on the boarding house roof when he saw the rider approaching from the north. Just one man, moving at a leisurely pace, leading a pack mule. Nothing threatening about it. But something made Evan stop and watch. The rider was young, maybe 25, with an open, friendly face and clothes that marked him as educated, a city man playing at frontier life. He stopped in front of the boarding house and called up to Evan. "Excuse me, sir, I'm looking for Margaret Crane. Is this the right place?" "It is. She's inside." "Wonderful." The young man dismounted and tied his horse. "Thank you kindly." Evan watched him go inside, then returned to his work. Probably just another boarder looking for a room, nothing to worry about. But 10 minutes later, Margaret appeared on the porch and called up to him. "Evan, need you down here." He climbed down to find Margaret and the young man waiting. Up close, the stranger had intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers, a writer or a lawyer, maybe. Someone who worked with words. "Evan Holt," Margaret said. "This is Daniel Pierce. He's a reporter from Denver. Says he's writing a story about old mining claims and fraudulent deeds." She paused significantly. "In Nevada, 13 years back." Evan's blood went cold. "Is that so?" Daniel nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. I've been researching a series of murders that took place in the Nevada mining camps in the early 50s. Legitimate prospectors killed for their claims, deeds forged, assayers bribed. Quite a scandal, but it was all covered up at the time. The perpetrators were never brought to justice." "Why are you digging into it now?" "Because I believe the evidence still exists. I've been following a trail, old letters, witness accounts, rumors of a prospector named Jack Brennan who escaped with documentation of the crimes." Daniel's eyes were bright with the fervor of someone chasing a story. "The trail led me here. To redemption. To you." Evan's hand moved toward his revolver. "I think you should leave." "Please wait. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I think we want the same thing." Daniel pulled a folded newspaper from his saddlebag and handed it to Evan. "Read this, then decide if I'm friend or enemy." The newspaper was from Denver, dated 2 weeks prior. The headline made Evan's chest tighten. "Territorial Marshal opens investigation into historical mining fraud." He read quickly, his pulse pounding. The article detailed new evidence that had come to light regarding systematic claim jumping in the Nevada territories during the gold rush years. Names were named, including 3 men who'd gone on to become wealthy and influential in Colorado politics. The territorial marshal was calling for witnesses and documentation. One of the names listed was the gray-bearded man. His real name was Thomas Garrett. He owned half of Denver's banking district. "How did this happen?" Evan asked, his voice rough. Daniel smiled. "An anonymous tip. Someone sent the marshal a letter detailing the crimes and suggesting where to look for corroboration. The marshal's honest, one of the few, and he's been wanting to go after Garrett for years. This gave him the opening he needed." Evan looked at Margaret. She met his eyes, her expression knowing. "You," he said. "You sent the letter." "I may have mentioned a few things to my nephew, the telegraph operator. He may have passed those things along to someone he knew in Denver." Margaret shrugged. "Can't prove anything, of course. But without the actual evidence Jack Brennan collected, the investigation will stall," Daniel finished. "Garrett has expensive lawyers and political connections. The marshal needs something concrete. Documents, ledgers, proof that can't be dismissed or explained away." He looked directly at Evan. "I think you know where that evidence is. Or at least, you can help me find it." Evan was quiet for a long moment, turning the newspaper over in his hands. This changed everything, changed the equation entirely. If the law was finally interested, if men like Garrett were being investigated publicly, then hiding wasn't the answer anymore. Exposure was. "Cheyenne," he said finally. "If it's anywhere, it's in Cheyenne, in a place Catherine would have considered safe 13 years ago." "Then we go to Cheyenne," Daniel said simply. "We?" Evan's eyes narrowed. "I don't know you. Don't know if I can trust you." "Fair enough, but you do know that Margaret trusts me, or she wouldn't have suggested I find you, and you know that going alone is risky. But going with a reporter who can publish whatever we find, who can make it too public to suppress, that's insurance." Daniel extended his hand. "Partner with me. Help me find the evidence. And I'll help you finish what Jack Brennan and Catherine started 13 years ago. We'll make sure those men pay for everything they've done." Evan looked at the hand, at this earnest young man with his city clothes and his dangerous idealism. Then he looked at Margaret, who nodded slightly. Finally, he looked up at the second-story window, where Lila stood watching, her face pressed to the glass. She deserved better than running, deserved better than fear. She deserved justice. Evan shook Daniel's hand. "All right. We're partners. But we do this my way, on my terms. And if anything happens to my daughter because of this, reporter or not, I'll hold you accountable." "Understood completely," Daniel said. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow, first light." Evan released his hand and headed for the stairs. "Tonight, I need to explain to a 12-year-old girl why we're going back into danger when we finally found peace." He climbed to their room and found Lila waiting, the blue quilt wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth. "We're leaving, aren't we?" she said. "Yes." "To find the evidence?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, accepting it with the same quiet strength Catherine had shown. "Will it end this time? Really end it?" "I think so. I hope so." Evan knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "But I can't promise it'll be safe, can't promise we won't face more danger before this is over." "Mama spent 12 years keeping me safe by running. Maybe it's time to be safe by standing still, by fighting back." Lila's gray eyes were steady. "I'm ready. Whatever comes next, I'm ready." Evan pulled her into an embrace, this brave child who'd lost everything and was still willing to risk what little remained. "Your mother would be so proud of you." "She'd be proud of both of us," Lila whispered into his shoulder. "We're going to finish what she started. We're going to make it right." Outside, the sun set on redemption, painting the streets gold and red one last time. Tomorrow they would ride toward Cheyenne, toward answers, toward an ending that had been 13 years in the making. But tonight, in this small room above Margaret Crane's boarding house, a father and daughter held each other and gathered strength for the battle ahead. Together. The way it should have always been. They left Redemption at dawn, 3 riders heading north through country that grew steadily rougher as they climbed toward the high plains. Evan led on his bay gelding, Lila beside him on the smaller mare Margaret had insisted they take as a gift, and Daniel Pierce bringing up the rear on his city-broke horse that spooked at shadows. The pack mule carried supplies for a week's journey, maybe more if they rationed carefully. The first 2 days passed in relative silence, each of them lost in private thoughts. Evan watched the horizon with the wariness of long habit, scanning for riders who might be following, for any sign that their departure had been noticed by the wrong people. But the prairie remained empty, just grass and wind, and the occasional antelope herd moving like liquid across the distance. On the third day, as they followed a creek bed lined with cottonwoods, Daniel finally broke the quiet that had settled over them like dust. "Tell me about Catherine," he said, guiding his horse closer to Evan's. "Help me understand what kind of woman spends 12 years running to protect a secret that could have freed her." Evan was quiet for so long that Daniel probably thought he wouldn't answer, but then he spoke, his voice low and measured. "She was the kind of woman who saw the best in people even when they showed her their worst. Kind, but not weak. Strong in ways that didn't require her to prove it with violence or hardness." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She believed in second chances, believed people could change, could become better than their circumstances. That's why she stayed with me when she learned about my past, and that's why she ran when she realized staying put me in danger." "She loved you that much?" "Yes, and I loved her the same way, which is why I let her go when I thought she was dead, and why I'm doing this now, for her, for Lila, for everyone those men hurt." Evan glanced back at his daughter, riding a few lengths behind, her face thoughtful as she listened. She deserved better than what the world gave her. This is the only way I know to make that right. Daniel nodded slowly. "When we find the evidence, I'll make sure her story is told properly. Not just the running and the fear, but the courage, the sacrifice. People should know what she gave up to protect the truth. Just make sure Garrett and his people pay for what they've done. That's the story that matters." They reached Cheyenne 5 days after leaving Redemption, arriving in late afternoon when the city was bathed in golden light that made even the roughest buildings look almost beautiful. The place had grown since Evan had last seen it. More streets, more structures, a railroad depot that hadn't existed 13 years ago. Progress, marching forward while people like Catherine ran for their lives in its shadow. They took rooms at a modest hotel on the edge of the business district, the kind of place that asked no questions as long as payment came in advance. Evan paid for 2 rooms, one for himself and Lila, one for Daniel, and they gathered in the men's room to plan. "Where do we start?" Daniel asked, spreading a hand-drawn map of the city across the bed. "Catherine lived here 13 years ago. She could have hidden the evidence anywhere." "Not anywhere," Evan corrected. "Somewhere she trusted. Somewhere that would still be here years later. Banks fail, businesses close, people move on. What stays?" Lila, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the blue quilt around her shoulders, spoke up quietly. "Churches. Mama always said churches were the only constant in a changing world. Said they outlasted everything else." Evan looked at his daughter with new appreciation. "That's smart thinking. Churches it is." There were 7 churches in Cheyenne proper, ranging from a small Catholic mission to a large Presbyterian congregation with a bell tower that dominated the skyline. They started with the oldest, a weathered clapboard structure that had been there since the city's founding, serving as everything from meeting house to courthouse to refuge during Indian troubles. The pastor was an elderly man named Reverend Walsh, white-haired and bent with age but sharp-eyed still. He greeted them in the sanctuary, where afternoon light slanted through simple glass windows. "Help you folks?" "We're looking for information about a woman who lived here about 13 years back," Evan said. "Catherine Brennan. She might have attended services here, or her brother Jack might have." Recognition flickered across the Reverend's face. "Jack Brennan. Yes, I remember him. Prospector, wasn't he? Came to services occasionally, though I got the sense he was there more for his sister than for salvation." His expression grew sad. "He died here. Wounds from some altercation out Nevada way. His sister was devastated." "Did she stay in Cheyenne after he died?" "For a time. Maybe a month. She came to church every Sunday, sat in the back pew, never spoke to anyone. Then one day she simply didn't come anymore. I heard she'd left town." The Reverend studied them curiously. "Why are you asking about her now?" "She was my wife," Evan said quietly. "She died recently. I'm trying to understand those years I lost with her." The Reverend's face softened with sympathy. I'm sorry for your loss. She seemed a good woman, though troubled by something heavy. Did she ever ask you to keep anything safe for her? Documents, maybe, or a package? No, nothing like that. The Reverend paused, thinking. Though I do remember one odd thing. After Jack died, she asked permission to place a memorial stone in our cemetery, even though Jack wasn't buried there. Said she wanted a marker to remember him by. I told her that was fine, that grief takes many forms. Evan and Daniel exchanged glances. This memorial stone, is it still there? Far as I know, cemetery's out back. You're welcome to look. The cemetery was small, maybe 50 graves, most of them weathered markers from Cheyenne's early days. They walked among the stones, reading names and dates, until Lila called out from the far corner. Here! I found it. The marker was simple granite, smaller than most of the others, set flush with the ground and half obscured by grass. The inscription read, Jack Brennan, beloved brother, 1825 to 1852. In truth, there is freedom. In truth, there is freedom, Daniel read aloud. That's an unusual epitaph. Evan knelt and ran his fingers over the words, feeling the grooves worn by 13 years of weather. Something about it felt deliberate, intentional. Catherine had chosen those words for a reason. Help me move it, he said. It took all three of them to shift the heavy stone, tilting it up and to the side. Beneath, the earth was undisturbed, just dirt and grass roots. No box, no package, nothing. Disappointment crashed through Evan. He'd been so certain. Wait, Lila said, kneeling beside the hole. She brushed away loose dirt, revealing something carved into the underside of the stone. Numbers. A sequence, 7 to 12, 1/1839. What is that? Daniel asked. A date, Evan said slowly. July 12th, 1839. He looked at Lila. Does that mean anything to you? She shook her head, then froze. Wait, Mama's birthday was July 12th, but she was born in 1831, not 1839. The numbers could be a combination, Daniel suggested, like a safe or a lockbox. But where? Evan stood, frustration building. They were close, so close he could feel it. But close wasn't enough. They replaced the stone and thanked the Reverend, who watched them leave with puzzled concern. Outside, as the sun touched the western mountains, they gathered on the church steps to regroup. We're missing something, Evan said. Catherine left us a clue with those numbers, but we don't know what it opens. Banks, Daniel said suddenly. Safe deposit boxes. They use combinations. We already ruled out banks, too unstable. Not commercial banks. The Territorial Bank. It's government-run. Been here since before Cheyenne was even incorporated. If anything would still be standing 13 years later, it's that. It was worth trying. They walked to the Territorial Bank, an imposing stone building on the main street, and found it still open. A clerk looked up as they entered, his expression professionally neutral. Help you? I'm looking for information about a safe deposit box, Evan said. My wife may have rented one here about 13 years ago. Catherine Brennan. The clerk's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I'm afraid I can't disclose information about our clients without proper authorization. She's dead. I'm her husband, and this is her daughter. We have a right. Perhaps you do. But bank policy requires documentation, death certificate, marriage certificate, proof of relationship. The clerk's tone was final. Come back with those, and we can discuss access. They left the bank as frustration gave way to despair. Getting those documents would take weeks, maybe months. The trail would go cold. Garrett and his men would find some way to stop the investigation. Everything would be for nothing. There has to be another way, Lila said quietly as they walked back toward the hotel. Mama was smart. She wouldn't have made it this hard. Maybe too smart, Evan muttered. Then he stopped walking, struck by sudden thought. Wait, what if she didn't use her real name? What would she use? Something meaningful, something she'd remember, but they wouldn't guess. Evan turned to Lila. Did your mother ever use another name? When you were moving around, did she ever call herself something different? Lila thought for a moment. Sometimes she'd say her name was Helen. Helen something. I don't remember the last name. Helen, Evan repeated. Helen. Where had he heard that name? Then it came to him. A conversation years ago, Catherine telling him about her mother, who died when she was young. Her mother's name had been Helen. Helen Brennan, he said. Her mother's name. That's what she would have used. They returned to the bank the next morning, this time with Daniel taking the lead. He approached a different clerk, a younger man who looked more interested in his lunch than in bank policy. Excuse me, Daniel said in his most professional voice. I'm Daniel Pierce, reporter for the Denver Post. I'm researching a story about unclaimed assets and safe deposit boxes that have been abandoned. I understand your bank has records going back quite far. The clerk perked up slightly. We do, yes. Since 1848. Excellent. I'm particularly interested in boxes rented by women, as they're often forgotten after death or remarriage. Would it be possible to review your records? Just the names and dates, nothing confidential. The clerk hesitated, then shrugged. I suppose that would be all right, long as you're not asking for account details. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a ledger, thick and dusty. Daniel opened it and began scanning entries, running his finger down columns of names. Evan and Lila stood behind him, holding their breath. Here, Daniel said suddenly, tapping the page. Helen Brennan. Box rented July 1852, 13 years ago. Paid in advance for 20 years. Is the box still here? Evan asked, his pulse pounding. The clerk checked his records. Yes, box number 73. It's never been accessed since the initial rental. Can we see it? Not without authorization from the renter or proof of death and inheritance. Evan's hand moved to his pocket, to the revolver hidden there. He could force this. Could make the clerk open the box at gunpoint. But that would bring the law down on them, would ruin everything. Lila stepped forward before he could act. Please, she said to the clerk, her voice small and earnest. That box belonged to my mother. She died in a fire, and I'm trying to find something of hers to remember her by. Just a letter or a photograph. Something to hold on to. The clerk looked at this thin girl with her honest eyes and her worn dress, and something in his expression softened. Your mother, you say? Yes, sir. Helen Brennan. She died 3 months ago. I'm very sorry. The clerk was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with policy versus compassion. Finally, he sighed. I suppose I could let you look at the box, just to confirm it's the right one. But anything you take out, that would require proper paperwork. Just looking would be wonderful, Lila said. Thank you. The clerk led them to the vault, a heavy iron door that swung open to reveal rows of small metal boxes set into the wall. He located number 73, used his key in one lock, and handed Evan a small key that had been stored with the rental records. This should open the second lock. Evan inserted the key with shaking hands. The lock turned. The box slid open. Inside was a leather satchel, cracked with age but intact. Evan lifted it out carefully and opened it on the table the clerk provided. Inside were papers, lots of them. Assay reports with official seals, property deeds bearing signatures, and a ledger, its pages filled with neat handwriting documenting names, dates, claims stolen, men murdered. Evidence. Complete, damning, irrefutable evidence. Evan looked at Daniel, who'd gone pale with excitement. This is it. This is everything. Can we take it? Lila asked the clerk. Well, the clerk looked uncomfortable. Technically, you'd need authorization. But if you were to, say, accidentally take it while I stepped out for a moment to use the facilities, he glanced meaningfully toward the door. I might not notice for several minutes. Thank you, Evan said quietly. Truly. The clerk left. They gathered the documents, returned them to the satchel, and walked out of the bank, trying not to run. Outside, in the bright sunlight of midday Cheyenne, they stood in silence, processing what they'd found. We need to get this to the territorial marshal, Daniel said finally, today, before Garrett realizes what we've done. They went directly to the marshal's office, where a deputy informed them the marshal was in Denver but would return the next day. They'd have to wait. That night, in their hotel room, Evan sat awake while Lila slept, the leather satchel clutched in his hands. This was what Catherine had died protecting. what Jack Brennan had given his life to preserve. Proof that Thomas Garrett and his partners had murdered at least 15 men for their mining claims, had bribed officials, had built an empire on blood and stolen gold. Tomorrow, it would all come to light. Tomorrow, justice. But tonight, sitting in the darkness, Evan felt only grief. Catherine should have been here for this. Should have seen her brother's sacrifice mean something. Should have lived to watch her daughter grow up free from fear. The door opened quietly and Lila appeared, the blue quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Can't sleep either? No. She came and sat beside him on the bed. Do you think Mama knew that someday we'd find this and finish what she started? I think she hoped. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Hope that the truth eventually wins. I'm glad it was us. Glad she trusted us enough to leave the clues. Lila leaned against his shoulder. I'm glad I found you. Me too, little one. Me too. The next day they met with Marshall Crawford, a grizzled man in his 50s who listened to their story with increasing intensity. When they spread the documents across his desk, his expression went from skeptical to grimly satisfied. I knew it, he said, reading through the ledger. I've been trying to build a case against Garrett for 2 years, but he's too well connected, too careful. This changes everything. He looked up at Evan. Where did you get this? My wife kept it safe for 13 years. She died protecting it. I'm giving it to you now so her death means something. Crawford nodded slowly. It will. I promise you that. With this evidence, I can bring charges that'll stick. Garrett won't be able to buy or threaten his way out. When? Daniel asked. When will you arrest him? Soon as I can get a judge to issue warrants, day or two at most. Crawford began organizing the documents carefully. You folks did a brave thing bringing this forward, dangerous too. Garrett's going to fight this with everything he has. Let him, Evan said. We're not running anymore. But running found them anyway. They were walking back to the hotel, discussing what to do next, when Evan caught movement in his peripheral vision. 3 men, emerging from an alley ahead, spreading out to block the street. And there, in the center, was Thomas Garrett himself, his wounded shoulder in a sling, but his gun hand perfectly functional. Halt! Garrett called out. His voice was cold and flat. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Evan stepped in front of Lila, hand moving to his revolver. It never belonged to you. And it's with the marshal now. You've lost. Have I? Garrett smiled without humor. Marshall's a long way from here, and there are 3 of us and 1 of you, plus a girl and a city boy. Math doesn't favor you. Walk away, Garrett. The evidence is already in play. Killing us won't change that. Maybe not, but it'll feel damn good after all the trouble you've caused. Garrett's hand moved to his gun. Say goodbye to your daughter, Holt. Everything happened at once. Garrett drew. Evan drew faster. Lila screamed. Daniel tried to pull her back. The first shot went wide, Garrett's aim thrown off by his wounded shoulder. Evan's return fire caught him center mass, sending him stumbling backward. The 2 other men opened fire and Evan dove, rolling behind a water trough, returning fire as fast as he could pull the trigger. 1 man went down. The other took cover behind a post, reloading. Evan was pinned, couldn't get a clear shot without exposing himself. He had maybe 2 rounds left in the revolver. Then a rifle cracked from above. The remaining gunman jerked and fell. Evan looked up to see Daniel on the hotel balcony, holding the Winchester Evan had left in their room, smoke curling from the barrel. Never said I couldn't shoot, Daniel called down. Just said I preferred words. Evan ran to where Garrett lay bleeding in the street, kicked his gun away, and stood over him. The man who'd hunted Catherine for 13 years, who destroyed so many lives over greed and pride, stared up at him with hatred and pain. You're finished, Evan said quietly. So are you, Garrett gasped. My lawyers, my friends, they'll see you hanged for this. Maybe, but you'll be dead or in prison, and everyone will know what you did. That's all that matters. Marshal Crawford came running with his deputies, drawn by the gunfire. He took in the scene, the dead men, the wounded Garrett, Evan standing with his smoking revolver, and his expression turned grim. This how you want it to end? He asked Evan. With more bodies? I didn't start this. I just finished it. Crawford ordered his deputies to arrest Garrett and collect the bodies. To Evan, he said, "You'll need to give a statement. Witnesses, too." He looked at Lila, who stood pale and shaking in Daniel's protective grip. "Get the child somewhere safe first. She's seen enough." Daniel took Lila back to the hotel, while Evan spent the next 2 hours recounting everything to the marshal. By the time he finished, the sun was setting and exhaustion had settled into his bones like lead. He found Lila in their room, sitting at the window, the blue quilt wrapped tight around her. She didn't look up when he entered. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "Yes. Garrett's under arrest. His men are dead. The evidence is secured. It's over." "Then why don't I feel better?" Evan sat beside her and pulled her close. "Because endings are harder than we think they'll be. Because we spent so long running that standing still feels wrong. Because your mother should be here to see this, and she's not." Lila buried her face in his shoulder and finally, let herself cry the way a child should be allowed to cry, without holding back, without being strong, without fear of who might hear. Evan held her through it, his own tears falling silent into her hair. They stayed in Cheyenne for another week while the legal proceedings played out. Daniel wrote his story and sent it to newspapers across the territory. The headlines screamed of corruption and murder, of justice delayed but finally served. Thomas Garrett was formally charged with 15 counts of murder and numerous counts of fraud. His empire began to crumble as partners distanced themselves and investors fled. On the morning they were set to leave Cheyenne, Marshal Crawford came to the hotel with an envelope. "Thought you should have this. It was in Catherine's safe deposit box, tucked in the back. My deputy found it when he was cataloging evidence." Inside was a letter in Catherine's familiar handwriting, addressed to Evan. He read it alone, sitting on the hotel bed while Lila packed their few belongings. "My dearest Evan, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass and you've had to finish what I couldn't. I'm so sorry. Sorry for leaving you. Sorry for keeping Lila from you. Sorry for all the years we lost to fear and running. You deserved better. She deserved better. I tried to do right and ended up doing harm instead. But I never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping that somehow, someday, we'd be together again, you and me and the daughter you didn't know you had. Take care of her. Teach her to be strong, but also kind. Show her that the world can be good, even when it tries so hard to be cruel. And forgive me, if you can, for all the mistakes I made trying to protect the people I loved. You were always the best part of me. Always." See. Evan folded the letter carefully and tucked it in his shirt pocket, over his heart. Then he stood and finished packing. They rode out of Cheyenne heading south, back toward Redemption. Back to Margaret's boarding house and the simple life they'd begun building there. The prairie stretched before them, gold and green and infinite, and for the first time in 13 years, the horizon held promise instead of threat. "What happens now?" Lila asked as they rode. "Do we just go back and pretend to be normal?" "We don't pretend," Evan said. "We become it, slowly, day by day, until normal isn't something we're trying for, but something we just are. Can I learn to read better and write? Mama taught me, but we never stayed anywhere long enough to really practice. You can learn anything you want. We'll get you proper schooling, books, whatever you need. And you'll stay? You won't leave?" Evan reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "I'm not going anywhere. Not ever. We're family now. That means we face everything together." "Family," Lila repeated, testing the word. Then she smiled. A real smile, bright and genuine. "I like that." They reached Redemption 3 days later, riding in at sunset to find Margaret on the boarding house porch, as if she'd been waiting for them all along. She took one look at their faces and nodded with satisfaction. "It's done then." "It's done," Evan confirmed. "Good. Now get yourselves washed up. Supper's almost ready and I won't have you sitting at my table covered in trail dust." Life settled into rhythms after that. Evan took on more permanent work around Redemption, helping the blacksmith, doing carpentry, hiring out for any job that needed capable hands. Lila started school, shy at first, but gradually opening up, making friends, becoming just another child instead of a girl who'd spent her life running. In the evenings, they'd sit together in their room and Evan would teach her things Catherine would have wanted her to know. How to read the stars, how to gentle a nervous horse, how to find water in dry country. And Lila would tell him more stories about her mother, keeping Catherine alive between them through memory and love. 6 months after Cheyenne, a letter arrived from Daniel. Thomas Garrett had been convicted and sentenced to hang. His partners had fled the territory or taken plea deals that would see them imprisoned for life. The mining families who'd lost loved ones 13 years ago were finally seeing justice, however delayed. Jack Brennan's sacrifice had meant something after all. On the first anniversary of the day, Lila had appeared in Evan's kitchen. They rode out to a hill overlooking Redemption and buried the blue quilt there, along with Catherine's letter and one of Jack's old prospecting tools that Lila had kept. They marked the spot with a simple stone and stood together in silence, saying goodbye properly this time. "She'd be happy we're together," Lila said quietly. "She'd be happy it ended this way." "Yes," Evan agreed. "She would." They rode back to town as the sun set, father and daughter, no longer running but finally, truly home. And if sometimes Evan still woke in the night, instinctively reaching for a gun that wasn't needed, Lila would be there across the room, breathing steady in sleep, and he'd remember why he'd fought so hard to keep her safe. Not because of what he'd lost, but because of what he'd found. A daughter. A purpose. A second chance at the life Catherine had dreamed they'd build together. And that, all of that, was enough. Years later, when Lila was grown and starting her own family, she'd tell her children about their grandmother Catherine, who'd been brave enough to run and wise enough to leave clues for those who'd come after, and about their grandfather Evan, who'd been fierce enough to fight and gentle enough to heal. She'd tell them that sometimes love means sacrifice. Sometimes it means standing your ground, and sometimes it means having faith that the truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually find its way into the light. She'd tell them that family isn't just about blood, but about choosing to show up for each other, day after day, no matter what the world throws at you. And she'd tell them that their story, her parents' story, was proof that even the darkest nights eventually give way to dawn. That hope, however fragile, is always worth holding on to, and that in the end, when everything else is stripped away, love is what remains. Love and the courage to keep moving forward together, always home.